I did not realize how much my sexual expression was suppressed until I was in the middle of making love and it came over me like a wave. It was coated in shame and this shadow almost lingering in the background that just prevented me from fully embodying and embracing the experience. I realized that deep down, I felt wrong. I felt wrong for having sex and I felt wrong for enjoying it. And honestly, it scared me a lot because I didn't realize that I was shaming myself to the degree that I was. And when I started finally facing it and unpacking it, I realized that none of the shame that I was carrying was even mine. It was rooted in my upbringing, from society, whispers from religion and culture, and all of the ways that women are made to feel small in our own bodies. And this is when my first taste of liberation really started to enter the room because I started thinking about how absolutely absurd it was to shame something so natural and human about myself. I mean, think about it. We have these organs and these senses and these bodies that are divinely designed for pleasure. Our sexual nature is just as natural as the act of breathing or eating. We don't shame animals for enjoying or having sex, yet when human beings do it, oh no, here comes the finger wagging and the judgment and the guilt. I'm sorry, that is just silly. I feel like silly is the only word to describe that, and life is far too short to be tiptoeing around the parts of ourselves that are primal and essential. So my first breakthrough was radically declaring to myself that from that moment forward, I would honor sex as the natural force that it is. I would talk about it openly without shame, and I would refuse to perpetuate the guilt that was passed on to me. And instead, I promised myself to honor my sexual expression with the same ease and freedom that I had when embodying the act of breathing. And from there, I just unraveled. I had finally broken through the wall of shame and I felt good and I felt empowered. And then I opened my eyes to see so many more walls that I had to break down. And this is when I started taking a very close look at my relationship with pleasure. I started asking myself, why was I denying myself the fulfillment and joy of pleasure? When I actually began peeling back the layers, I realized that for so much of my life, pleasure felt like a privilege. I started by looking at my upbringing and seeing how growing up lower socioeconomic status put me in a position where I had to prioritize survival over pleasure. And then I looked at my ancestry and seeing how my African and indigenous ancestors underwent unimaginable hardships and pleasure did not come easily to them. And then looking at my experience as a woman and the fact that I have been conditioned and taught that pleasure is for the man, and in fact, I am the one to induce pleasure. And so all of this layered was just absolutely crushing my ability to embody what I deserved. And I realized that I had no idea how to prioritize my own pleasure. And I especially had no idea how to advocate for myself in the bedroom. Sitting with all of this really helped me acknowledge my wounds, but also all of the micro ways that I had been conditioned to shrink myself. Just that simple acknowledgement really helped me begin reclaiming parts of myself that were shrouded in shame and discomfort, the ways in which I was unable to love myself with pride because of all of the conditioning I had built up within my being. For example, breaking down the walls of shame around masturbation and realizing that it is a divine ability to be able to please yourself whenever and however you want. I am so confused by the fact that men and masturbation is discussed so frequently, so often, and so casually, yet a woman loving herself and pleasing herself is this like taboo thing. Absolutely not. I couldn't even compose myself. That makes no sense. Also, the fact that masturbation is the sweetest form of self-love. It is a way to know yourself so intimately and so tenderly, so sweetly. It fully taints your relationship with yourself when you're sitting there making love to yourself and you feel this cloud in the room or that shadow in the corner like we talked about earlier. It's like, no, 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 this is me time. Shame has no place here. Making love to yourself actually transforms the way that you navigate making love with someone else. My personal journey with self-intimacy really taught me my boundaries. It taught me my pleasure points, and also just more about my body and what feels good, what feels comfortable for me. I always say I think it's essential to know how to make love to yourself first before even diving into the dance with someone else, because it really teaches you how to love you, and that way you can teach someone else how to love you too. Pleasure is not something you have to earn or feel guilty about. You fully deserve it. You have to do nothing to deserve pleasure. I hope that we can all just in this moment right now close our eyes and reclaim that right there. That pleasure is our birthright and no one can take that away from us. I love that for us. Speaking of reclamation, what changed everything for me was when I started acknowledging where patriarchy had settled into the crevices of my being and infiltrated my relationship with sex. And I am still a work in progress. You know, every time I turn the corner, I find patriarchy somehow creeping in the shadows, trying to influence my role in intimacy or how I view myself. But one of my biggest shifts in this acknowledgement was realizing that I am not a passive vessel in the experience of sex. Knowing that I'm an active player, knowing that I can steer this boat as I please. Because of porn, movies, and again, societal conditioning, there has been this unspoken and spoken expectation of women to just go with the flow of sex and with the pace and desires of a man. We're unlearning that. This is the time of unlearning that. Learning that I can clearly communicate what I want, what doesn't feel good, what I don't like, and what I'm curious about completely changed my entire perspective and experience of sex. Because sex is not just about your partner, it's equally about you. And yet, so often, sex with men, particularly, is framed around the idea that sex ends with ejaculation, as if that's the sole destination. Sex is something that you get to define, and when it is shared with a partner, it should be equally fulfilling and nurturing, not one-sided or dismissive of your needs. My experience with liberating myself from the patriarchy when it comes to my relationship with sex oftentimes looks like just honoring my rapture. I mean, fully embodying it and having my moment, and also just being able to communicate what feels good and what doesn't. It is such a small yet grand thing a lot of us struggle with doing, and opening my throat chakra in those intimate moments really helps me reclaim myself in that experience and feel like it is mine and not just something, again, that I'm a passive vessel in. The beautiful thing about sex is that it's a dance of energy and you get to move that energy as you please. And this realization is what led me to my biggest breakthrough in redefining sex and unlearning the narrow ways in which I had been taught to think about it. I really sat with my definition of sex. It was very much so shaped by the limitations of religion and marriage and also morality. This shift made me realize that sex and spirituality are not separate whatsoever, and in fact, they are beautifully and inherently interconnected. For so long, I had internalized this idea that sex was shameful and somehow against God, but I've come to understand that that couldn't be further from the truth, and for me, sex is actually a way to grow closer to God. Take our rapture, our orgasms, for example. They are probably one of the most heightened states of energy that we can experience, and it's hard to ignore the divinity in those moments. They're transcendent, they're powerful, they can be used for manifestation and connecting with something so much higher than ourselves. Dismantling that narrative and that story that sex and God are separate and sex is against God just liberated me on an entirely different realm of being able to embody and embrace my sexual expression as something that is divine and not something that is shameful or bad or against God. So sex as a spiritual act, but also sex as a creative expression. This is another part of sex that I ignored for so long, the fact that it is an act of creation, using your body to experience joy, to shape, twist, and move it in a way that brings you pleasure, and ignoring ignoring this part of our creativity can cause so many blocks in our life, especially in our creative expression. I think a lot of the time when we have these conversations about sex, it's like so serious and so but it's like sex is actually really playful and lighthearted and fun, and it can be talked about that way by women, especially. I think men have always had the freedom to rah about sex, and it's like reclaiming our power to be able to express our lightness about sex and seeing it more so as a circle. How I like to explain creativity rather than this straight up and down line of like, oh, we can't step out of this boundary, we can't step out of this line. So yeah, being able to define sex on my own terms, recognizing the spirituality of it, recognizing the creativity of it, really allowed me to look at the sacred energy exchange as something completely different. A dance of energy, a conversation with God, and also just a form of my creativity in play. What I'm most proud of myself for at this point in my life and what I want for others is to be in those settings with family or others where conversations about sex are met with that shameful discomfort, to be able to stand in your truth. That's what I've been able to do lately. And although it feels like I'm completely jumping off a cliff and diving into the deep end, but when I do it, it's amazing because it's like you're watching them expand in real time. It's almost like knocking down the walls of a very small room and showing them that they have the entire land to dance on. And I've seen family members, like even my grandma, completely liberate in real time and realize like, oh, I can say this, I can discuss this previously awkward thing. And there is nothing better than seeing an elder do that. This message isn't necessarily meant to encourage you to be intimate, especially if you're not yet ready. But I just can't help but wonder how my internal journey may have been different if someone had held space for me to define sex for myself, if someone had just said, hey, this is yours. An intimate, expanding dance of pleasurable energy that you get to explore on your own terms. I think if I would have entered my sexual expression on those terms, I wouldn't have been so confined by outdated narratives and shame. And I think that my internal and external world would have unfolded with more freedom and curiosity and empowerment. I'm just glad we could bust down some of these walls together today. We did that. We can dance on the land, babes. But if you have any questions or you want to explore more topics in this area, let's chat in the comments. I'd absolutely love to continue exploring this path to sexual freedom together. It's the best way to do it. In the meantime, every month I send out love letters to make your inbox a little sanctuary. So if you haven't already, you can sign up below in the description box. I love writing to you every month. Okay, this was so fun. I love you so much. I love you to the moon. Thank you so much for being here and chatting with me about all of this gushy stuff. I feel like I just got hyped right at the end, but what can I say? Love does it to me.